The fourth volume in the Compendium series features the never-to-be-repeated English Electric Type 5, or Deltic. Unlike the other programmes in the series, this one is compiled solely from archive footage, much of it from the Loco's 1970s heyday. That was 55017 working the Flying Scotsman at Darlington in September 1975. And this is 55012, the same day. Obviously we'll also be featuring the early 1980s and the decline of the surviving Locos. Here, for instance, is number 6 passing Joancroft Junction in March 1980. As the title suggests, this opening section shows all 22 Locos in tops number order. So, 55001, St Paddy at Cretan in July 1976 with the 805 York to King's Cross. The King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry sets off from the London terminus in February 1981 with the 1220 to York. The Loco was repainted green the previous December. .55003 Meld comes off a Merrymaker charter at Carnforth in July 1978 after arriving from Chesterfield. The Loco ran light to Carlisle before returning the tour south. .55004 Queen's Own Highlander arrives at Berwick with the 755 Edinburgh to London on the 28th of May 1976. Three days earlier, 55005, the Prince of Wales's Own Regiment of Yorkshire, heads north from Berwick with the 1400 King's Cross to Aberdeen. .55006, the Fife and Forfar Yeomanry, departs from Newark in May 1979. A year earlier, 55007 Pinzer at Werrington. In the summer of 1973, 55008, the Green Howards, arrives at Doncaster while working the 11 o'clock King's Cross to Waverley. The Loco spent most of that May in the adjacent works, having both power units, both bogies, and the steam heat boiler replaced. Number 9, Elistidon, powers south through Bawtry with the 755 from Edinburgh in April 1976. .55010, the King's Own Scottish Borderer, heads for the cross at Challoner's Wing Junction with a semi-fast from York in 1980. On the 3rd of May 1975, 55011, the Royal Northumberland Fusiliers arrives at Grantham with the 1410 from Newcastle. .55012, Crapello heads for London at East Linton in June 1977 with the Talisman, the 1600 from Edinburgh. In 1980, 55013 was blinged up for a trip to the Wren Hill celebrations, which was then cancelled. This is Challoner's win again, and number 13 all dressed up with nowhere to go, except York. .55014, the Duke of Wellington's regiment passes Cretan with the down Aberdonian in July 1976. Two weeks before it was transferred to York Depot in May 1981, 55015 Tullyar passes Long Sandal with the 933 Hull to King's Cross. .55016 Gordon Highlander departs from Doncaster with a York to King's Cross train in 1981. In August of that year, 55017, the Durham Light Infantry takes the Penman Shield diversion with 1E10, the 910 Dundee to King's Cross. .55018 Ballymoss rolls into Doncaster in 1980 with a semi-fast. In early 1973, 55019 Royal Highland Fusilier moves off the King's Cross fuelling point. The loco had arrived in London from Leeds. .55020 Nimbus reaches journey's end with the 11 o'clock from London in March 1976. .55021 Argyll and Sutherland Highlander passes Heaton in 1981. And finally, the original, 55022 Royal Scots Grey runs round at Carlisle while working the Deltic Pioneer Rail Tour in 1979. As the East Coast premier motive power, the Deltics naturally works all the prestigious named trains, like the most famous of all, the Flying Scotsman. A Haymarket machine heads the up train at Finsbury Park in 1973. A year later, Nimbus has charge of the Scotsman at Beal. Five days after that, Pinzer hauls the train across Alnmouth Viaduct, May 1974. Number 8 heads south through Peterborough with the Scotsman on the 27th of July 1974. The train had only one stop, Newcastle. Well, two if you count King's Cross. The 12 o'clock from London to Aberdeen was known as the Aberdonian. 55022 runs north through Northumberland at Beal in May 1974. Two months later, Deltic 14 heads the down train at Peterborough. The Deltics tended to work the Aberdonian only to and from Edinburgh. Lesser traction handled the northernmost section. Royal Scots Grey again at Beal. The southbound Talisman left Edinburgh at 4 p.m. 55017 approaches Newcastle in May 1974. A few weeks earlier, 55019 heads south at Beal with the Talisman. A Haymarket-based loco heads the train. In the same week, Ballymoss has the up train near the same spot. The Leeds Executive, the 730 Leeds to King's Cross, picks up 55006 in July 1974. Getting rid of head code reporting numbers made identifying trains a little harder, although some remained unmistakable. 55017 with the southbound Scotsman at Cretan in July 1976. Ballymoss at Thirsk in May of that year with the northbound Scotsman, the 10 o'clock departure from the Cross. Meld heads the southbound train at Northallerton later that month. The Flying Scotsman morphed into an HST service in May 1978. 2 years before that dreadful event, 55009 has the up train at Little Bytham. The Talisman left London at 4 p.m. Meld passes Little Bytham later that day. Crapello heads through Cretan in July 1976 with another northbound Talisman. The southbound train 2 months earlier at Newcastle, with Crapello once again providing the power. Gordon Highlander slows through Heaton on final approach to the Newcastle stop. Our final view of the Talisman finds Meld charging south through Northumberland in May 1976. .55006 heads the up Aberdonian at Northallerton on the 19th of May 1976. The same day, 22 has charge of the down train. Number 9 with the Up Aberdonian 2 months later at Cretan. 55012 heads south with the Leeds Executive at Little Bytham in July 1976. A few days later, Tulliar works the train at Cairby. In April 1976, number 16 heads south at Bawtry with the Bradford Executive. Lissedon at Cairby with the same train in July 1976. On the 8th of June that year, the Silver Jubilee was introduced and ran with a headboard. Crapello hauls the inaugural train at East Linton. .55006 heads for Haymarket after bringing in the northbound service, the 745 from King's Cross, on the 9th of November 1977. Two days earlier, St Paddy works the train north at Weston. And finally, the southbound train, the 3 o'clock from Edinburgh, normally with the same loco that had earlier arrived from London. By the spring of 1973, overhead wires were starting to go up between King's Cross and Hitchin. The 715 from Bradford passes Gannick Corner. On the same day, 55014 heads the Flying Scotsman at Hadley Wood. Still waiting for its tops number, 9006 heads south at Potter's Bar with the 810 from Newcastle. Followed shortly afterwards by 9010 and northbound Aberdonian. Back at Gannick Corner, Meld heads for the Cross with the 725 from Leeds. The wiring of the suburban section was completed by July 1974. Pinzer heads north with the 1125 to Leeds and Harrogate at Oakley Park. At the same spot, the Green Howards with the Aberdonian. The 12 o'clock from Bradford heads south at New Southgate behind the Black Watch. .55005 and the 825 from Newcastle at Oakley Park. .55014 and the Up Scotsman at New Southgate. The Durham Light Infantry marches north with the Talisman at the same spot. Moving on to 1977 and up the road to Potter's Bar, we find Crepello heading the Aberdonian. North of the station, St Paddy gallops along. Crepello again at Welwyn North with the 1125 to Leeds and Harrogate in May 1977. A month earlier, number 1 at Brookman's Park with the 8 o'clock to Edinburgh. Number 12 heads north at Hadley Wood. The 10.05 King's Cross to York passes Potter's Bar with 55006 in charge. Later that day, the loco returns south with the 1411 from York. The Fife and Forfar Yeomanry heads the 12.05 to Hull at Nebworth. And the final shot shows Crepello at Welham Green with the 12.45 from Hull on the 17th of April 1980. Seeing Deltics on the main line without trains always seemed a little surreal. Here's number 12 going north near Newark in 1977. 13 going south at Newark. Number 6 at Cretan in July 1976. Royal Scots Grey northbound at Little Bytham. .55012 at Offord early in 1979. Nimbus head south at Scremerston in May 1976 after working the 8 o'clock from King's Cross to Waverley. Number 10 southbound at Pillmore in the autumn of 1981. Crepello is heading for Finsbury Park at Hitchin in August 1980. Nimbus rolls through Doncaster before taking over the 5.55 King's Cross to Edinburgh at Doncaster in June 1975. It's hard to believe in today's multicoloured railway world that the addition of white paint to the cabs of 6 Finsbury Park Deltics was regarded as revolutionary at the time. The metaphorical equivalent of sticking 2 fingers up at the BR board and it's decreed that everything must be blue all over. The white paint was the brainwave of depot manager Alan Baker, who thought it might improve staff morale as the depot began the long march towards eventual closure. The 6 locos were embellished between April and October 1979. The depot's other 2 racehorses, St Paddy and Nimbus, were in Doncaster Works awaiting repair, but sadly they never came out, and so never received the white cab treatment, or any more trains to work. And Lissadon arrives at and departs from Doncaster. Number 9 was the fifth to go white in August 1979. Talliard's cabs were painted in July. Here it is shunting around King's Cross in February 1981. Capello was the last to be painted in October 1979, possibly because of the amount of time it spent out of traffic. Its main generators were particularly prone to flashing over, so it was always needing new generators and new traction motors. It was known at Finsbury Park as Flashover Joe. The problem was faulty wiring, which, when the loco crossed junctions at speed, caused the motor contactors to open under load, with consequent loud bang and loss of power. With all that behind it, Capello heads for Hull with the 1205 from London at Thorn Junction in April 1981. Pinzer with the 722 Plymouth to Edinburgh at Lamberton the same month. Number 7 got its white cabs in August 1979. Ballymoss was the fourth to partially escape the all-consuming blue. The 910 Dundee to King's Cross at Acklington. It was Meld that began this minor revolution in April 1979. In July 1980, it's hauling the Hull Executive at Claypole. 55009 and the 1143 York to King's Cross at Joan Croft in January 1980. The 1220 King's Cross to York passes Retford Grove Road behind Capello in March 1981. All of the following 8 shots feature Capello, so while you're watching, here's the loco's potted history. The Deltic 12 left Vulcan Foundry on the 4th of September 1961 and ran light to Doncaster Works. 3 days later it ran a test to Grantham and back. The next day a test to Peterborough and back. It was released from Doncaster on the 12th of September and worked its first train 24 hours later. It carried its name from day one and was turned out in two-tone green, obviously, although it acquired a small yellow warning panel by 1962. On the 15th of December 1961, after running just over 34,000 miles, it ran into the back of a freight train at Wood Walton. Repairs were carried out at Doncaster and the loco re-entered traffic on the 23rd of January 1962. On the day of the new Deltic timetable, the following 18th of June, Capello worked the Elizabethan, complete with headboard. Full yellow ends were applied in February 1967. 1 year later, the loco was fitted with dual brakes and repainted in BR blue. On release from the works, it was loaned to Haymarket Depot for 2 months. On the 22nd of January 1971, the loco emerged from Doncaster again, this time with electric train heat. As a depot favourite, which you may find hard to believe given its later performance, the loco was chosen for a number of specials and for the inaugural runs of the Silver Jubilee and the Hull Executive. Its final train was the 2255 Edinburgh to King's Cross, which arrived in London on the morning of the 14th of May 1981. It returned to Finsbury Park effectively withdrawn, although the official date is shown as the 31st of May. Returning to the other white cab racehorses, Lissadon heads away from Berwick in April 1980 with the Plymouth to Edinburgh Interregional, which it would have taken over at York. In January 1981, Tullyar passes Melton Lane with the 805 to Hull. The same train passes Maxey. Oh yes, the village named in my honour, behind number 12 in August 1980. Meld at Saul North with the 1630 Hull to King's Cross in July 1980. It had earlier worked north with the 1205. Ballymoss passes Prestonpans with the 705 Newcastle to Edinburgh in March 1980. Crepello once again at Doncaster with a train from York in 1980, viewed from the ever so convenient station car park. The 935 from Hull heads south through Sandy behind Ballymoss. The Hull service diagrams were normally out and back workings to or from London in the same day, although one did have a third trip tacked onto the end, a Hull to Doncaster train. The same applied to the Yorks, usually out and back with an occasional third working. Ballymoss heads the morning train to Hull at Long Sandal in December 1979. It returned with the 1245 and then worked a sleeper to Edinburgh. With less than a fortnight in service to go, Crepello passes Shaftholme with the 805 from York, diverted via Nottingley. In March 1980, Meld heads the Edinburgh-Plymouth and later in the day will pick up the northbound train. Elisterdon at Rossington with the midday service to Hull in August 1980. We end the section at Hull itself the previous May. Ballymoss sets off with the morning train to King's Cross as Elisterdon awaits departure with a rugby league special to London. This entire section was filmed in 1975. First, Coyley with the 825 Newcastle to London. Number 11 heads for Newcastle with the 9 o'clock King's Cross departure. The 8 o'clock from Edinburgh thunders south behind Pinzer. The King's Own Scottish Borderer has charge of the northbound Scotsman. Haymarket Shedmate, Queen's Own Highlander with the 1 p.m. King's Cross to Newcastle. Ballymoss and the southbound Scotsman. .55002 heads north with the Aberdonian. Number 5 heading south with the 855 from Aberdeen. The 2 o'clock to Aberdeen passes behind Pinzer. .55014 heads home with the 3 o'clock to Newcastle. And the Black Watch heads north with the Talisman. We begin the tours at Ranskill with number 12 working the East Coast Pullman Farewell on the 20th of May 1978. Later that day, the loco worked the Thames Forth Express charter from Leeds to Carlisle. This is Ribblehead. On the 23rd of July 1978, Meld was given the Merrymaker you saw earlier, from Chesterfield to Carlisle and back. This is the outward stop at Sheffield. The loco came off the train at Carnforth after shunting the stock. Then a quite rare Class 84 electric completed the trip to Carlisle, where Mel was waiting to work the return. Number 3 recouples to the train before the run south over the S&C. On the 14th of October 1979, the Deltic Preservation Society ran its very first rail tour, the Deltic D-Tour, and Lissadon hauls the train through Hellifield. The charter ran from York to Carnforth and back. This is Settle Junction. 2 weeks later, Gordon Highlander hauled the LCGB's Deltic Discoverer. The train started from Liverpool behind a pair of 25s. The Deltic took over at Leeds. Worked the train to Polmadie via the S&C and Kilmarnock. Towards the end of 1981, British Rail organised a series of farewell charters, as did a number of rail tour operators. On the 7th of November, Tullyar worked T&N's Deltic Queen of Scots from King's Cross to Edinburgh, but via Leeds and Sunderland. This is Dordon. 2 weeks later, number 2 worked the Deltic Scotsman. It ran from York to Inverkeithing via the S&C and Carlisle. This is Come Winton. BR's Deltic Devonian ran from Finsbury Park to Exeter on the 28th of November, behind number 16, a last-minute substitute. This is Winterbourne Earls on the return run over the South Western Main Line. The same day, Royal Scots Grey had charge of the Deltic Venturer from York to Paddington via Derby and Birmingham. The train passes Stratton St Margaret's. And to complete a notable triple on November the 28th, number 9 worked a Newcastle to Edinburgh charter via Carlisle. This is Shilford. The returning train at Hayden Bridge. This is the only day that Deltics worked on all 5 BR regions. One week later, Tullyar was in action again on the Hadrian Flyer, from Peterborough to Carlisle via the S&C. This is Armathwaite. At Carlisle, the stock continued to Kingmore for servicing. return took the Carlisle-Newcastle line before returning to Peterborough via the east coast. Number 9's next tour appearance was on the 19th of December. The Deltic Broadsman departs from Norwich. The final BR charter was the Deltic Scotsman Farewell from King's Cross to Edinburgh on the 2nd of January 1982. Finsbury Park allocated Elistodon as backup, and number 9 ran in front of the train between Peterborough and Newcastle. After a brief stop at York, the loco continues north. The wing thistle headboard was specially loaned for the occasion by the National Railway Museum and entrusted to the personal care of one Murray Brown. The main train appears under Holgate Bridge and takes the centre road through York Station. The tour headboard sold at auction in November 2013 for £2,400. The train pulls into Newcastle Central for a change of crew. Royal Scots Grey took the last train out of Edinburgh on the return to London. And then it was all over. St Paddy brings us into King's Cross for this look at the 1973-1974 period. At the time, the 9,000 numbers were gradually giving way to the Class 55 of the top system. The head code numbers were about to change to marker dots. To the west of the station, the fuelling and servicing point provided parking space to Deltics and others between trips. A regular flow of locos to and from the platform area provided plenty of interest. "9000 waits for the signal before performing the King's Cross Shuffle to reach its train on platform 5. Which just happens to be the Flying Scotsman. "9004 emerges from Gasworks Tunnel with the arriving southbound Scotsman. "9005 departs for Newcastle. And on a different occasion, obviously, the same loco comes back with the 725 from Leeds. In the background, Meld is about to set off northwards. An unidentified regiment departs from platform 4 and passes the station signal box. The Green Howard makes its way to platform 7 in June 1973. There's a much clearer view of the impressive box in this shot of a King's Cross arrival. "9010 arrives with the 715 from Bradford. While number 11 takes a breather at the servicing point. "9009 was the first to have its head code panels replaced with 2 white dots. Well, eventually. The number 1 end was converted in October 1972, the other in February 1973. In February 1974, 9017 became 55017. Here it's arriving from Leeds with its newly applied tops. After a shunt release, the Durham Light Infantry heads for the servicing point. For some reason, the loco is showing the same head code at both ends. Nimbus rolls into the cross with the Newcastle Executive in the spring of 1974. Its tops number was applied the previous November. Ballymoss is worked in with the 830 from Leeds. With the coaching stock out of the way, it can now move off to the fuel point. In the final shots, another racehorse sets off for the north. Class 254 HST sets began working a limited East Coast timetable in May 1978 and had an immediate effect on the Deltic fleet. The flagship trains were lost and Class 55 was relegated to semi-fast workings. 55006 heads for York at Peterborough. Another York-bound train at Abbots Ripton in the summer of 1979 behind Crepello. As more and more HSTs arrived, more of the lesser services benefited from Deltic power, like the Edinburgh-Plymouth. Number 10 takes the train across the Royal Border Bridge in April 1981. A year earlier, the northbound service passes Spittal behind 55008. At Innerwick, the northbound working heads for Edinburgh behind Deltic 19 in August 1981. When the HSTs arrived, St Paddy had already worked its last train and was at Doncaster, never to reappear. Nimbus suffered the same fate because there was simply no point in overhauling them anymore. Not the most taxing working for a Deltic, 55004 and the 1734 Newcastle to Edinburgh in April 1980. One month earlier, Queen's Own Highlander was working to Plymouth, and here heads south at Ballincreef, midway between Drem and Long Midri. 55006 at Howden with a hull service in July 1979. The next month, the loco appeared on the 1405 King's Cross to York. .55003 rolls into York with a train for Edinburgh. Meld was the third Deltic to be withdrawn at the end of 1980. Another shot from York, 55008 departs for London. A regimental crest from this loco sold at auction in November 2013 for a staggering £4,600. At the same auction, one from Gordon Highlander went for only £1,300. Black Watch heads for Selby at Challoner's Win in 1980. 3 years later, the Selby diversion opened, and this bit of track was no longer part of the East Coast Main Line. More secondary work for number 4, the 705 Newcastle to Edinburgh at Musselburgh. .55011 passes Drem with the 1425 Edinburgh to Newcastle. And occasional working was the 1553 Carlisle to Edinburgh via Newcastle. 55021 passes Hayden Bridge in 1981. Toliar with the same train, that's October. .55002 heads for York Station to pick up a London train in 1981. Pinzer pulls into Newcastle Central with the 910 from Dundee to London. .55008 approaches the King Edward Bridge from the Gateshead side, shortly before his final stop at Newcastle Central. The various Pullman trains also benefited from Deltic power. Number 17 passes Doncaster with the Yorkshire Pullman in 1972. The same train at Oakley Park. A Gateshead regiment passes with the Tees Tyne Pullman. Moving into 1973 and onto Gannett Corner, we find a racehorse working the Up Hull Pullman. On the same day, number 8 emerges from Hadley Wood Tunnel with the Yorkshire Pullman. A racehorse on the Up Tees Tyne at Potter's Bar in 1974. $55,005 hauls the Yorkshire Pullman at Peterborough in July 1974. St Paddy passes Little Bytham with the Hull Pullman in July 1976. $55,006 appears through the mist at Arscombe with the Hull train in March 1977. Crapello heads to Hull at Egmonton in November 1977. 12 again that year with the Hull Pullman, this time at Little Wymondley. But we end with this strange one, number 12 and the 550 King's Cross to Aberdeen. Presumably the Pullman coach was just being moved and locked out of use. This is Tuxford in June 1979. For the final section, we return to the heyday period of the early 70s. All the locos had by now been dual brakes and ETH fitted, and the HSTs were still only a gleam in the designer's eye. Talliart arrived at Doncaster with the 755 to Bradford in 1973. Nimbus charges south with the 12 o'clock from Edinburgh in September 1973. "9016 restarts from Doncaster with the 1 o'clock from London the same day. Royal Highland Fusilier arrives with the 11 o'clock from Edinburgh. St Paddy at Doncaster with the 11 o'clock from London. Nimbus arrives with a train from Newcastle and then continues on its way south. Elishadon calls in with a Newcastle-bound train. In the last shot from Doncaster, Type 4 number 364 passes through after rescuing St Paddy and the 2 o'clock London to Aberdeen and Peterborough. Moving south to Finsbury Park, we find Deltic 4 and the 1125 to Leeds and Harrogate in June 1973. The 825 from Newcastle nears journey's end, behind 9000. The third Haymarket machine of the day, number 16, takes the Aberdonian north. An unidentified regiment heads through New Barnet with the 2 o'clock to Aberdeen in the spring of 1973. The 825 from Newcastle, south of Hadleywood Station, the same day. A Scotland-bound Gateshead loco approaches Hadley Wood. This one has just departed from Waverley with the 1 o'clock to King's Cross. The Duke of Wellington's regiment arrives in Edinburgh with a train from London in 1973. In May 1974, 55021 arrives with the Aberdonian. The Deltic will be replaced here by a Class 47. This could well be Tullyar departing from Edinburgh for the south. "16 arrives to take over the southbound Aberdonian. After arriving with the Flying Scotsman, number 2 heads for Haymarket Depot. "9004, having just done the same, arrives at Haymarket. The 2 o'clock from King's Cross to Aberdeen approaches Colton Hill Tunnel in 1974. Number 17 passes through Beal with the 8 o'clock from London to Edinburgh. Two weeks earlier, 55007 at the same spots with the southbound Scotsman. "55017 at Beal again in May 1974 with the 8 o'clock Edinburgh to King's Cross. One of Haymarket's Deltics heads north away from York in 1974. We end the programme with a selection of shots taken at Peterborough on the 27th of July 1974. Nimbus makes a stop with the 9 o'clock from King's Cross to Newcastle. Pinzer is signal checks while working the 910 to Leeds. '19 arrives with the 8 o'clock to Edinburgh. While St Paddy has charge at the 8:55 from Aberdeen. And we end with Gordon Highlander arriving and departing with the 11 o'clock King's Cross to Edinburgh. The object of this programme is very simple: to show as many events from the second Deltic age, 1997 to the present day, as a normal DVD running time allows. It begins at the very beginning, SDA-wise, with Royal Scots Greys' first test run from Glasgow Works to Berwick on the 9th of November 1996. The loco passes Dunbar with a makeshift rake of res vans in tow. The process began in 1983 when the D9000 Fund bought the loco from British Rail, but many years of fundraising followed until enough money, and the small matter of rail privatisation, allowed the dream of the Deltic return to the main line to become a reality. A second successful test took place a week later, providing the green light for the fun to begin. The inaugural charter train, Hertfordshire Rail Tours Deltic Deliverance, on the 30th of November 1996, should have run from Edinburgh Waverley to King's Cross, but managed only 58 miles before encountering the wooden platform canopy of Berwick Station. In BR days, the driver would simply have drawn forward, revved the engines to blow out the flames, and carried on as if nothing had happened. Unfortunately, in the intervening decade and a half, health and safety had been invented, so 9000 was switched off and towed rather ignominiously to London with its train. Back at the works, the problem was quickly rectified, and another precautionary test run allowed 9000 to be ready for its second charter engagement on January the 2nd, 1997, 15 years to the day since the last BR Deltic train. The opening leg of the Deltic Reunion ran from King's Cross to Hull, and here passes Gilberdike. A clockwise run around the Harrogate Circle took the train on to York before a high-speed return to London.